The field hospital shook as artillery thundered overhead, canvas roof tearing apart. Operating lights flickered, shadows ran in chaos, acrid smoke stinging eyes. Elise, a small medic, clutched her first aid kit, face bloodied, heart pounding. An enemy infiltrator slipped inside, detonator bright in his hand, rifle aimed at wounded soldiers on the operating table. SEAL Commander Ross, blood soaking his bandages, grabbed Elise's wrist and whispered, "One shot. End it." Elise raised the gun, pulled the trigger. The enemy dropped. The entire operating room fell silent. Just a medic. Elise Morgan, 29 years old. Brown hair tied low, slender frame, medic at Field Hospital, Saffron 12. Daily responsibilities: preparing plasma, blood typing, suturing wounds, cleaning boots for wounded soldiers, quietly writing letters home for injured troops unable to hold pens, hiding protein bars in the pockets of night guards' uniforms. Teammates cared for her, but always saw Elise as just a medic. Elise is too fragile for the front lines. Just let her handle casualty paperwork. During weapons training, when Elise accidentally adjusted a new soldier's scope alignment, everyone laughed. A medic trying to be a sniper? Elise just smiled thinly, never arguing back. In her locked personal locker, a sniper training certificate and a letter requesting withdrawal from the program. Passed, had topped her sniper class but left after a mission where her hesitation cost a teammate's life. Old habits remained. Cleaning monitor screens like cleaning rifle scopes. Calculating wind direction every evening, though nobody understood why. The other medics didn't know about her background. To them, she was someone who'd chosen medical training over combat training. Someone dedicated to healing rather than harming. What they couldn't see was that Elise's medical precision came from the same source as her marksmanship training. The understanding that small details could mean the difference between life and death. Her hands had learned steadiness from holding rifles. Her eyes had developed focus from tracking targets through scopes. Her breathing control came from sniper training that taught her to fire between heartbeats. But Elise had sworn never to use those skills again. After losing her spotter in Afghanistan, she'd requested immediate transfer to medical training. She wanted to save lives, not take them. She wanted to heal wounds, not create them. The transition hadn't been easy. Medical school was different from sniper school, but both required absolute precision under pressure. Elise had thrown herself into medical training with the same intensity she'd once applied to marksmanship. She studied anatomy like ballistics, practiced procedures like firing drills, memorized drug interactions like wind calculations. Her medical skills were exceptional because they were built on a foundation of tactical training that most medics never received. "Why do you work so hard?" other medics would ask. "Because someone's life depends on getting it right," Elise would reply. They assumed she meant surgical procedures or trauma response. Elise meant everything she did, medical or otherwise, because she'd learned that competence in one area often translated to life or death consequences in others. A real sign. Doctor. Hayes recalled, during a power outage, when operating lights flickered, Elise quietly tapped the ballast to stabilize the illumination. No words, just precision. Elise had found peace in medical work, but she'd never forgotten the skills that had once defined her. Sometimes the past demanded to be remembered. Rainy night. The hospital suddenly came under artillery fire. Canvas tore, dust swirled in, the smell of disinfectant mixing with smoke. Elise pulled wounded soldiers from collapsing cots, using torn shirts as tourniquets, medicine bottles as splints. Strange footsteps echoed in the corridor, voices that didn't sound like friendly troops. An enemy infiltrator disguised in a white medical coat, carrying a black bag, gripping a detonator in his hand. Operating lights flickered. Oxygen tanks hissed. Electrical sparks scattered. Elise calculated quickly. If it exploded, the entire tent would become a sea of flames. Patients would have no chance. Ross Hale, wounded commander, breathing heavily, pulled her close and whispered, "One shot. End it." Elise's hands trembled, looking at her medical bag, then at the M17 pistol beside the instrument tray. She remembered sniper training, breathing control, aim point, trigger squeeze. She raised the weapon, squeezed the trigger. Bang! The bullet pierced the infiltrator's hand. The detonator flew away. The entire room fell completely silent. Elise lunged forward, kicked the explosive device away, pinned the attacker's arm, tied it with gauze. Surgery continued. Nobody spoke, but everyone's eyes had changed. But this wasn't just about medical training suddenly revealing hidden combat skills. This was about someone who'd spent years trying to escape her past, being forced to confront it. The muscle memory was still there. Years of medical work hadn't erased the training that had once made her one of the best marksmen in her class. Her hands remembered how to hold a weapon, how to control breathing under pressure, how to make split-second decisions when lives hung in the balance. But more importantly, her mind remembered why she'd learned those skills in the first place: to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The infiltrator had been targeting wounded soldiers, helpless patients who posed no threat. Everything Elise had sworn to protect as a medic. Her shot hadn't been about returning to her old life as a sniper. It had been about using whatever tools were necessary to preserve the life she'd chosen as a healer. The other medical staff watched her work with new understanding. This wasn't someone who'd gotten lucky in a crisis. This was someone with training they'd never suspected. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" a nurse asked quietly. "I used to do other work," Elise replied, returning to her medical duties. But the implications were clear. Elise had capabilities beyond medical training, capabilities she'd chosen not to use until circumstances left no alternative. The wounded commander looked at her with growing respect. "You saved more than just the wounded. You saved the entire medical mission." Elise continued working on his injuries. That's what medics do. We save whoever needs saving. But that wasn't just medical training. No, but medical training is what I choose to use every day. The distinction was important. Elise had skills from her past, but she'd dedicated her present to healing. When healing required other capabilities, she'd use them, but her identity remained focused on medical service. A real sign. Penn later recalled, "Without that shot, today's report would have been a casualty list instead of a successful medical operation." The attack continued outside, but inside the medical tent, the atmosphere had changed. Everyone understood that their quiet medic was more than she appeared to be. The hospital alarm sounded slowly as more enemy fighters poured into the corridors. Elise maintained her composure. Shot down an attacker, trying to set up a PKM machine gun. One round through the scope of a sniper outside the entrance. One shot detonated an ammunition crate. SEALs and hospital security seized the opportunity to counterattack. Doctors and nurses stood stunned. The medic shoots more accurately than the guards. Ross whispered, "Who were you before?" Elise replied, "Someone who lost teammates because I hesitated. Today, I won't let it happen again." In 20 minutes, the hospital held firm. Enemy forces retreated. Elise set down the weapon, returned to suturing wounds, administering IV fluids, controlling bleeding. Word spread internally. She'd once trained as a sniper. anonymously left due to her past. But the story was more complex than a simple return to old skills. Elise's precision with weapons came from the same place as her precision with medical instruments. Years of training that demanded perfection under pressure. She'd learned that small mistakes had large consequences, whether in surgery or in combat. The disciplines reinforced each other. "How many confirmed kills?" Ross asked during a quiet moment. "I don't count kills anymore. I count lives saved." "That's not what I asked." Elise continued working on his wound dressing. 17 confirmed during active service. But I've saved hundreds more as a medic. The mathematics of service had changed for her. Instead of measuring success by enemies eliminated, she measured it by patients recovered, surgeries completed successfully, soldiers returned to duty. Her transition from sniper to medic hadn't been about forgetting her past. It had been about choosing how to apply her capabilities in ways that aligned with her values. "Why did you really leave Special Operations?" Ross pressed. "Because I realized that preventing the need for difficult shots was more important than making them perfectly." "But tonight, you made some very difficult shots." "Tonight, prevention wasn't enough. When medical solutions aren't sufficient, I use other tools." Her approach was pragmatic rather than ideological. She preferred healing to harming, but she understood that sometimes protecting the ability to heal required temporary use of other skills. The medical staff began treating her differently. Not with fear or suspicion, but with deeper respect for the complexity of her background. "You could have had any assignment in the military, Doctor," Hayes observed. "Why choose field medicine?" "Because field medicine is where healing skills are most needed, and where other skills might occasionally be necessary to preserve the healing mission." Her choice had been strategic. Field hospitals operated in dangerous environments where medical personnel might face situations requiring capabilities beyond traditional medical training. Elise had positioned herself where her dual skill set could serve the greatest good, primarily healing, but ready to protect the healing mission when necessary. The young medics began seeking her guidance not just on medical procedures, but on how to remain calm under pressure, how to make critical decisions quickly, how to maintain focus when chaos surrounded them. "The most important skill isn't technical," she'd tell them. "It's the ability to do what's necessary to preserve life, whatever that requires." Whether that meant performing emergency surgery or eliminating threats to patients, the principle remained the same. Her small notebook, officially for medical records, contained additional entries, threat assessment protocols, defensive positions, evacuation procedures, information that seemed paranoid until it became essential. The attack had proven that medical personnel in combat zones needed more than medical training. They needed tactical awareness, situational assessment skills, and occasional capability to defend their patients directly. Elise had been preparing for that reality without advertising it. "Will you teach us some of those defensive techniques?" a young medic asked. "I'll teach you medical procedures that might save your life someday. The other skills, I hope you never need them. But if we do, then you'll know they're available if absolutely necessary." Her balance was perfect. Primarily a healer who used other capabilities only when healing required protection, but always ready to provide that protection when medical solutions weren't sufficient. If not for that shot, today's report would have been a death toll instead of a medical success story. The official report stated, Medic Elise provided medical support. Hospital maintained operations. Not one word mentioned weapons. Days later, in the hospital cafeteria, Elise sat quietly eating cold soup. Someone who'd once mocked her placed down a cup of coffee. "I'm still alive because of you." Ross, leaning on crutches, voice carrying, "Never forget." The person we thought only knew bandages saved the entire hospital. Nobody applauded, but their eyes had changed. Respect, gratitude. From then on, the seat next to Elise always remained empty, like a silent acknowledgement. The atmosphere in the medical unit had permanently shifted. Elise was no longer seen as just medical support who needed protection. She was recognized as someone who could provide protection while delivering medical care. "Ma'am," a young medic approached her, "will you teach us how to stay calm under fire?" Elise looked up from her medical charts. "The same way you stay calm during surgery. You remember that panic doesn't help the patient." "But what about the other skills?" "Medical skills are what I use every day. Other skills are what I hope never to need again." The distinction remained important to her. Elise had not returned to being a sniper who happened to know medicine. She remained a medic who happened to retain other capabilities. Her daily routine continued unchanged. Patient care, wound treatment, medication administration, surgical assistance. But now, with complete recognition of her dual capabilities. Other medical personnel began receiving tactical awareness training throughout the military. Elise's actions had highlighted the reality that medical staff in combat zones needed broader skills than traditional programs provided. "She changed how we think about medical training," one administrator noted. "Made us realize that healers in war zones need defensive capabilities too." Elise continued her quiet service, writing letters for wounded soldiers, sharing food with guards, maintaining equipment with precision, born from understanding that lives depended on everything working perfectly. The young medics who worked with her learned more than medical procedures. They learned how to maintain composure under pressure, how to make critical decisions quickly, how to prioritize when resources were limited. "What's the most important thing you've learned?" one asked. Elise thought for a moment. "That healing people sometimes requires protecting them first, and that the best protection is being prepared for situations you hope never to encounter." The chair beside her remained empty, as a reminder that some people carried capabilities they preferred not to use, but which became essential when circumstances demanded them. People often categorize others. Medical personnel don't fight. But that night, one well-timed shot saved an entire hospital. Elise Morgan, a small medic, heard the whispered words, "One shot. End it." And she dared to act. Her story reminds us that people often possess capabilities we never suspect. The nurse who was a former soldier, the teacher who served in special operations, the mechanic who was once a medic. They choose civilian or support roles not because they lack other skills, but because they've found new ways to serve others. When healing isn't enough, when protection becomes necessary, these hidden capabilities emerge to preserve the mission they've chosen. The person you dismiss as just support might be exactly the guardian you need when everything falls apart. True strength often means choosing not to use your most impressive abilities until circumstances make them absolutely necessary for protecting others. If you believe in quiet stories like this one, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.